Hello and welcome. In this lecture video, I'm going to be providing an overview of job order costing. So job order costing, and also what we'll talk about in the next chapter, process costing, are two types of product costing systems. I'll write that down. They're both types of product costing systems. Okay? And so when we talk about a product costing system, what we're referring to is some type of a system that helps us determine how much does it cost us to make something or to provide some type of service. And so what we're really talking about is, in terms of getting a little bit more detail, we're saying how do we track materials, labor, and overhead for the products that we make? How do we track materials, labor, and overhead for the products that we make? So, as I was saying earlier, there's two types of product costing systems. There's job order, which we'll talk about in this chapter, and then there's process costing that we'll talk about in the next chapter. Okay? So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about job order costing. Okay? So a job order costing system, when is it going to be used? It's going to be used with products made to unique customer requirements. That's the first characteristic. And then the second characteristic of job order costing that we need to talk about is that we track costs by the job. And again, what costs are we talking about? When we're talking about costs, we have to be a little bit more detailed, a little bit more specific. We're talking about direct materials, direct labor, and MOH, manufacturing overhead. So we track materials, labor, and overhead by the job, and companies that would use job order costing system would be those types of companies that make unique products to customer specifications. Right? Think unique products to customer specs. All right? So in terms of some examples of companies that use job order costing, the first one we could say would be a law firm, would be an example. We could say a car repair shop. We could also say a construction company. And then I'll give you one more, a shipbuilder. Alright, so let's talk about one of these, the car repair shop, in a little bit more detail, because that's something that you probably have some experience with. If you've ever had a car, or your parents have had a car and they've had to get it fixed, or even just a state inspection. So when you go to the car repair shop, what they do is at the end, right, they give you a bill. And on that bill, they'll say, here's your materials, and then they also charge you for labor. So they'll say, it took us 2 hours, and then to fix your muffler, and then we also had to buy the muffler part. And so then they give you the dollar here, the dollar amount, and then they give you the total. Okay? So that's the way your bill works. And then you look at the total, and then you inspect it and make sure these are reasonable. How do they track the costs? They track the costs by fixing your car. They're tracking the materials and then the labor for fixing your car. Your car is the job. Okay, so your car is the job. So a job is just a fancy way of saying the way that we're going to track costs by. Okay, how are we going to track costs? We're going to track it by the job. In the context of a construction company, here at UMW, we're renovating some dorms. What we could say is that the job would be the renovation of Virginia Hall. That would be a job for a construction company. If you go down here where you're talking about shipbuilders, if you're from the Norfolk area, or my mom used to say, because she's from Norfolk, the Norfolk area, you have the big shipbuilders that build the Navy ships down there. How do they track the costs? By building whatever aircraft carrier they're making. Okay, so they're tracking the materials, labor, and then of course also overhead for building that ship. They're tracking the materials, labor, and overhead for renovating Virginia Hall. They're tracking the materials, labor for fixing your car. And then a law firm, in terms of what would be the job, it would be the client. Client would be the job. Right? So that's job order costing. And like I said, we're going to talk more about process costing in the next chapter, but I'll go ahead and introduce it right now. There's a couple characteristics with process costing. As opposed to job order costing, which is used when we have very different products that are made to customer specifications, and think about a car repair shop in terms of very different products. One person could need a muffler change. One person could need a new transmission. Somebody else may just need a Virginia state inspection. So very different jobs in a car repair shop. The process costing systems, though, those are going to be used with similar products. Okay? Similar products for process costing systems. The other characteristic is that there is a continuous and uniform production process. And then the third characteristic is that we track costs by department. Okay? So three important characteristics for process costing systems used with very similar products, whereas job order was talking about very different products. All products that we make with a process costing system go through a continuous and uniform production process, and we track the cost by department, not by job. So if we make soap, for example, soap would be a good example of soap manufacturer would be a good example of a company that would use a process costing system. Yes, there are different types of soap, but it's still soap. Even though it might be lavender, vanilla types of soap, it's still soap. It's not nearly as different as a car repair shop. Car repair shop, Virginia State Inspection, is a much different cost and much different effort on the behalf of the mechanics than fixing a muffler. So muffler is very different. The muffler change is very different than getting Virginia State Inspection. Vanilla soap versus lavender soap, yeah, it smells different, may have a slightly different recipe, but it's still soap. Okay, so they're similar. They're very similar. Muffler, Virginia State Inspection, very different. Okay? So getting back to the idea of a soap manufacturer here, the second characteristic, we have a continuous and uniform production process. So all soap that we make has to be mixed and it has to be packaged. So all soap has to go through this continuous and uniform production process in the sense that it needs to be mixed and then also needs to be packaged. Even if it's lavender soap or vanilla soap, it still needs to be mixed and packaged. So all soap goes through this continuous and uniform production process. The other thing, the process costing system, is that we contract the cost by department. So what we would be saying in that case, if we have a mixing department and a packaging department, we would be tracking the cost. We'd say, here's all the materials, labor, and overhead associated with the mixing department. Here's all the materials, labor, and overhead associated with the packaging department. So we're tracking the costs by department. Some examples of companies that would be using process costing, as I just said, a soap maker, soap manufacturer. You could also say a chemical manufacturer. Then finally, we could say a cement manufacturer. Those would be examples of companies that use process costing systems. Again, you can see different chemicals. They're still similar products because they're all chemicals. Cement, sure, there's different. I'm not a cement expert, but I'm guessing that there's a lot of different types of different types of cement, but it's still cement, so they're still similar. Not nearly as different as a car repair shop, Virginia State inspection versus a muffler change in terms of how much materials and labor are required for each one of those. Very different, similar. Okay? So when we talk about our overview of job costs and then the financial statement accounts, you look on the next page to say that a cost of a job in a job order costing system is going to be equal to the direct materials on the job plus the direct labor for the job plus the overhead. And so what we're saying over here is that a job order costing system needs to be able to relate materials, labor, and overhead to different jobs over here, to specific jobs like that. They have to be able to relate that. Right? And that's something you can see right over here. We have a job cost sheet. And so, as we'll talk about it in a second here, a job cost sheet tracks materials, labor, and overhead at the summary level for each job that we have. So you can see job 257, 258, 259, different jobs. We're tracking the costs for each job, the materials, labor, and overhead on that job cost sheet. Okay? You see over here that, about work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. In turn, to give work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold some context in terms of job order costing, we say work in process, the cost of the jobs that are currently being worked on. They're still working on them at the end of the accounting period. They are not finished at the end of the accounting period. So it'd be the sum of all the costs of the jobs that we are still working on, that we have not yet finished, at the end of the accounting period. In terms of finished goods, that's going to be equal to the cost of all the jobs that we have completed. The materials, labor, and overhead assigned to those jobs that we have completed but not yet sold. In terms of cost of goods sold, that would be equal to the cost of materials, labor, and overhead. So it's important to remember what we mean by cost. We mean materials, labor, and overhead. The materials, labor, and overhead of the jobs that we have sold during the accounting period. And that gives us our cost of goods sold. Okay? In the next lecture video, I'm going to talk about source documents in terms of job order costing, and then also talking about the cost flow with job order costing system, and then introduce manufacturing overhead. Okay? Thank you.